longer, even a memory, just a name. I hope my voice may perpetuate the great work of my life. God bless my dear old comrades of Balaclava and bring them safe to shore. Florence Nightingale.
That was a recording of Florence Nightingale's voice from 1890. During the Crimean War in 1853 to 1856, soldiers were faced with terrible hospital conditions that were unsanitary and usually didn't make it out alive. But that all changed when Florence Nightingale revolutionized not just hospital conditions, but nursing for the world. The reactions she got were mixed because of the idea of a woman, let alone a nurse, revolutionizing and reforming the medical world and establishing a respectable profession and earning her title as the mother of modern nursing. In an interview with Pauline Erickson, a former Army nurse, I asked, "Do you know who Florence Nightingale is?"
Yes, I certainly do. Yes, I do. She did a lot for not only nursing, but medicine in general. Because of her, there was greater sanitation put into practice. And during the war, when she was active doing her thing, that the number of casualties decreased because of where she stood in sanitation, insisted on cleanliness, not so much crowding, and waste disposal, because otherwise typhoid fever could have been, wiped out the troops also, but they would die from infection.
Florence Nightingale was born on May 12, 1820 in Florence, Italy. Her parents were from England, but she was born in Italy while they were traveling, since she was born into a very wealthy family. Florence had one sister, Frances Parthenope Nightingale, who was 1 year older than Florence. Parth was jealous of Florence because she was smarter, prettier, and clearly more liked than her father. But Frances Nightingale, Florence's mother, liked Parth better because she didn't think studying was all that important, but believed women should not have careers, get married, have babies, and run households. Carrie Alexander writes that when Nightingale was a teenager, she believed she got a calling from God to help the poor and the sick. Due to this calling, she decided to dedicate her life to it. When she shared this idea to her parents, they strongly disapproved of her decision and wanted her to be a housewife. Since Florence's idea was cut down by her parents, she retreated into the life of a country lady. She felt useless, but at night she lived a secret life. She studied hard, working by candlelight, still following her passion. Eventually, her dad let her go to school to become a nurse. By the time Florence was 33, she was already making a name for herself in the community. Florence got her first job on Harley Street. She did not receive a salary because it wasn't ladylike. However, at the first hospital she worked at, the overall conditions improved, and by spring, the hospital was doing great. But Florence was looking for a new challenge. When the Crimean War began in 1854, British were unprepared to deal with the number of sick and injured soldiers. The medical wards were unsanitary, lacked professional tools and medical supplies, and many complained about the conditions. Sidney Herbert was the politician in charge of the Army's finances, but he was also a good friend of Florence. So when he needed nurses, he knew who to go to. He wrote a long, flattering letter to Florence, saying she was the only person in England who could gather an official group of nurses and keep them in order. According to Jenna Kagarell, within a day it was agreed that Florence would lead the expedition. She would have the grand title of Superintendent of the Female Nursing Establishment of the English General Hospitals in Turkey. She would be fully in charge of 40 nurses, but of course, she would have to obey the army doctors in Scutari.
There weren't really any other nurses there. They were male attendants, and of course this created a kind of gendered battle from the get-go. War was not a woman's, domain at that time, so it was a big cultural change, an intrusion of women into this male sphere of influence and jurisdiction.
And he told Florence that he doubted the conditions were as bad as they were reported, and he promised goods would be sent to the hospitals by the time she arrived. Florence and her nurses then embarked an 8-day voyage to Turkey and reached Constantinople on November 4, 1854. When they arrived at the barracks, they were shocked. The hospital was vast, filthy, and open sewers underneath. There were mice, insects, and rats everywhere around the barracks. The men were starving to death. The supplies were nowhere to be found, no pillows, barely any blankets, so soldiers had to lay on the floor in filthy clothes. Their clothes were washed, but not good enough, and still were filled with blood-sucking lice. The government allowed Florence and her nurses to go to the barracks, but many male doctors considered them an insult or threat to their authority. The doctors prohibited Florence and her nurses to be anywhere near the patients. Florence gave her nurses housekeeping chores. According to Jenna K. Gorell, the nurses sorted supplies and improved shirts, slings, and pillows. They bought food suited for invalids in Constantinople and cooked them on their portable stoves, even though the doctors wouldn't let the men eat them. Florence and her nurses continued on improving everything, buying operating tables, stocking up supply cupboards, and hiring a chef. Their work soon paid off, and after they cleaned up the Scutari hospitals, they then headed to the hospitals in the Crimea. The death rate drastically dropped from 42% to just 2% in just a few months. Florence improved the hospitals by creating charts and gathering data on the number of soldiers killed, injured, or diseased. Math was her favorite subject growing up. This was a new and revolutionary way to see how many soldiers were dying from different cases and how to prevent the leading cause. At 38, Florence was mostly bedridden due to Crimean fever, and spent her time writing letters and books, still continuing her work. In 1860, Florence used the money from the Nightingale Fund to start St. Thomas's Hospital in London. The hospital was strictly built around her book, Notes on Nursing. St. Thomas's was the world's first professional medical school. Florence passed away in London at the age of 90 on August 13, 1910. Florence Nightingale's legacy has also been challenged by later historians. Many have accused Nightingale as being racist because her rejection of Jamaican nurse Mary Seacole to join her during the Crimean War. But that wasn't the case in Prisoners of Eternity. Nightingale criticizes Mary's work by saying, "Mary was very kind to the men, and what is more to the officers, and did some good, but she also made many drunk." Nightingale may have not agreed with her behaviors, which is a possibility of why she was not included in their team. In 1982, historian F.B. Smith published Florence Nightingale, Reputation and Power, portraying Nightingale as a manipulative and overpowering figure rather than the heroic lady with the lamp. Smith even described her as a psychopath, a claim that sparked major controversy among historians and led to renewed debate over Nightingale's true character and influence. In an interview with Brett Hashem, a male nurse, I asked, "Do you think gender plays a role in your job?"
I do, for a couple different reasons. Um, I mean, from a couple questions back, just the idea of women being respected in their fields, especially in the math and sciences, which at least back in the day used to be dominated by males. Uh, but yes, I do think it plays a role. But how much, I'm not entirely sure. Uh, I mean, on a small scale, I've seen patients, like I'll walk into a patient's room and they'll immediately greet me with, "Hi, doctor." But then, 5 seconds later, one of my female coworkers will come in, who's also a nurse, and they'll be like, "Oh, hey, nurse." And so, like, they just assume that because I'm a male, that I'm a doctor. Um, so yeah, I would say in that respect, yes, I still see it every now and again.
Yeah. Although Florence was criticized back then, her impact still continues today. One way Florence is involved with nurses today is the Nightingale Pledge. It is an oath nurses say during their pinning ceremony, which shows respect toward Florence for all the work she has done for modern nursing. In an article by Linda Yoder, she continues to be recognized as the nurse leader who revolutionized nursing by collecting and using data, introducing hygiene practices that reduce mortality rates, and providing reports to governmental leaders about changes required to improve military health care among British troops, as well as civilian public health. Florence Nightingale revolutionized modern nursing for the world, reforming medical practices which are still used today.